Welcome to the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
Welcome to another episode of the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. And we have a very special guest. And I hope you all, if you don't know him already, Aaron Rupar, I hope you get to know him because he's an influencer, which I'm sure he loves that phrase. He's an influencer on Twitter, and I've followed him for a long time. And we actually did a podcast together several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago or so, because Aaron is a guy who, he's more than an influencer. Let's get that out of the way. He's a journalist, and he has written for a number of publications, and we'll go down that road with him. But he's a guy who stands out to me because for years he has closely monitored Donald Trump's speeches and rallies and gaggles outside New York courthouses and all of those things. And I thought to myself, my God, this is the most mentally strong man walking the face of the earth. And I had to talk to him about it. And we did. And we'll get back together and do some more of that again today. Let's just get to it. Aaron Rupar, welcome to the McFeely Mess Podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Mike. It's good to reconnect after all these years.
So explain to listeners who you are. I didn't probably do a very good job of that and sort of only got into some of what you do, but explain who you are.
Sure. So these days I publish a newsletter called Public Notice, where we're covering politics and media, a lot of coverage of the American right and Trumpism, which kind of dovetails with the stuff that I was writing about and covering at Vox, where I was kind of their in-house Trump correspondent. And most people probably know me from Twitter, where, going back, 7, 8 years now, I've been doing a lot of video work, but basically posting news clips, but a lot of clips from Trump rallies, congressional hearings. These days, of course, I clip speeches that President Biden makes and pretty much any and all political events that you can imagine. And so, that really helped me grow a following on social media. And, now I post on Threads and on Blue Sky and all these other places as well, but still, mainly on Twitter. And so, I ended up leaving Vox in the fall of 2021 and launching a newsletter on Substack. And so now I'm completely independent, but after my second kid was born in the spring of 2022, I kind of gradually moved into more of like a publisher role. So I'm still writing 2 or 3 times a month. I'll write a column and publish it. But then a lot of the content that we publish is from my contributors, and I have a great team that I work with. And so, if you're interested in kind of a liberal perspective on U.S. politics, and obviously it's going to be a very big political year, kind of a monumental 6 months. I think it's like 6 months, coming up here just in a few days, where we'll be 6 months out from the election. You'll probably enjoy Public Notice, which you can find at publicnotice.co.
Yeah, I think you have just about 900,000 X followers or Twitter followers, which is that is a substantial number. And so when I semi-jokingly said you're an influencer, I really think you are.
Well, I was up over 900,000 until yesterday, when you may have noticed I ended up in response to I ended up arguing with some people who were liberals who, because of some of the campus protests, are now saying that they're not sure if they're going to be able to vote for Joe Biden. And I kind of made a case to various people with large followings that's insane. And people got mad. And so I ended up losing a few hundred followers overnight. I noticed this morning I'm back down under 900,000. But it's a small price to pay for trying to talk sense into people.
Well, and trying to help save democracy. I mean, it's incredible. And I don't know if you've thought of it this way, but from 2015 up until now, what an incredible time to be somebody who follows politics closely and writes about them and tweets about them and threads about them. I don't know if that was your plan or if you somehow just sort of came about this by happenstance or luck or a metamorphosis, but what a time to be alive, so to speak.
Just a brief note on that. I mean, I worked my job before I moved to DC to cover national politics was I was a communications person for the House Democratic Caucus in Minnesota. So it's based out of I was living in Minneapolis, but of course my job was based out of St. Paul at the Capitol. And I found that to be, I came from a journalism background, and I just found that job to be really dull. And so I kind of got to a spot where I was like just really desperate to get back into journalism. And they're just, as you're aware enough of the Twin Cities and it's similar to, the Fargo, Moorhead area where it's not like there's a ton of journalism jobs. So I ended up just kind of applying. I wasn't really eager to move, but, I applied at all these different places and ended up getting a job at Think Progress, which no longer exists, but it was a newsroom that was inside the Center for American Progress in DC. And so my first day there actually coincidentally was Super Tuesday, February 2016. And, that was a huge milestone day in terms of Trump consolidating, that primary and kind of taking control of the GOP. And they needed someone, I was an editor, but they needed someone who, as reporters were kind of out, doing reporting trips and out of the newsroom, they needed someone kind of based in the newsroom who could just kind of blog style cover the primary. And so I ended up kind of by default being the Trump person, which kind of made sense because my background when I was at the City Pages many years ago now, a big part of my beat was covering the Minnesota Republican Party, which at that point in time was pretty zany with, Michele Bachmann was kind of a recurring major character who I covered quite a bit. And so, it kind of felt like home to cover Republicans, but I just ended up kind of, jumping on the bandwagon of covering Trump, right as he was emerging as the 2016 nominee. And then that led pretty seamlessly into a lot of the video stuff that I was doing because, I'd be watching these rallies, these Trump rallies, and it didn't take too long for me to kind of realize that, you post some of these clips on the internet and there was an appetite for those because you watch, like, for instance, like a President Biden speech right now, and they're pretty traditional political speeches. I mean, there's some highlights here and there, and I'll post clips and they get, there's good engagement and people share them. But, it's not like the vintage Trump rallies where, there'd be fights in the audience and he'd be egging people on, to punch protesters, or you never knew what outrageous thing he was going to say next. And so it lent itself to the type of video coverage that I still do on social media. And, I was kind of lucky to stumble into that, right as U.S. politics was kind of going off the rails.
Michele Bachmann, I had somehow blocked Michele Bachmann's name out of my mind. I'd forgotten about her. She would seem to be somebody, and if people don't know, because she's been out of the spotlight for a while, but she was sort of the wacky far-right Republican who said and did controversial things before that was all the rage. She was a congressional representative for Minnesota, which is now, I believe, Tom Emmer's district in Minnesota. But I come to think of it, I don't know why she hasn't made a comeback. Because this moment is perfect. It's perfect for her, though, right?
That is interesting. People might remember that she ran for president in 2012, I believe it was, and didn't make it very far. And then she ended up, she was from Stillwater, Minnesota, which, is a purple to trending quite blue area. And so when there was redistricting, her district kind of shifted more towards St. Cloud, as you mentioned, which, now is Tom Emmer's district. And I still will see her pop up every now and then. She'll be on Newsmax and she'll still speak at some of these like evangelical Republican conferences and things like that. But yeah, you're right. She's not that old. I'm guessing that right now she's probably in like her mid 60s. So, by the standards of U.S. politics, that's quite young. And so it is a little bit surprising, but I think, she was in Congress for about 10 years and, in some ways was almost like a proto Marjorie Taylor Greene, kind of similar with like the hardcore evangelical brand of politics and like very culturally kind of reactionary, supported Trump. And so, yeah, that's interesting. It seems like, especially given how down bad Minnesota Republicans are these days, I could see her being competitive in some of these districts, although I guess, any district that's kind of swingy or purple, she's probably too far out there. But yeah, kind of a name from the past, like a decade ago, it seemed, she kind of faded away.
She was a pray the gay away before praying the gay away became all the rage. She was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, but you have now that's the norm for the Republican Party. Whereas, as you said, 10 years ago, she seemed like she was out there. But she was post Sarah Palin, but pre Kristi Noem. And maybe I had kind of forgotten about that.
Yeah, you guys in North Dakota kind of get off pretty easy because, of course, you got Kristi Noem in South Dakota, and I was noting over the weekend, she supposedly this coming Sunday is going to be on CBS Face the Nation, and I'm going to be shocked if that actually occurs. They hyped it last week that she was going to be discussing her new book, and the book, which people probably are aware of by now, is where she writes about shooting her dog, shooting her dog in addition to some other animals too. I mean, it's like an animal holocaust at her dwelling there in South Dakota. But in any event, so she was going to go in there to hype her book, which was kind of meant to bolster her prospects as a vice presidential contender. But, I've seen even Republicans obviously kind of trashing on her over, shooting her dog. So it just seems like, Margaret Brennan, who's the host of Face the Nation, she's not like she's not like a super hard hitting interviewer, but I would still be somewhat surprised if she ends up going through with that, because I just can't imagine that interview going well for her. But anyway, I was going to say, North Dakota, you guys kind of get off easy just because I don't feel like you have these kind of really loony Republicans up there. I mean, you have, Kevin Cramer, who's just kind of like a normal Republican, obviously supports Trump, but then, your one representative is on TV a lot, I believe Kelly Armstrong, right? And he's kind of just like a normal Republican. So yeah, I mean, it's you would think maybe North Dakota could produce some people that grab a few more headlines than they do, but they seem to be pretty mild up there.
Well, all the crazy people are in the state legislature, so don't kid yourself. There's plenty of the far right wingers. And it's interesting you bring up Kevin Cramer's name, and we're getting into the deep political weeds here, but Kevin Cramer at one time, not that long ago, was really seen as a reactionary, far-right evangelical Republican. And I said to a friend of mine just last week or the week before exactly what you just said, which is, God, Kevin Cramer seems like a normie now, which in my view, and I'm obviously, if anybody who listens to this podcast or reads my columns knows that I'm coming from the left side of the aisle pretty strongly. But Kevin Cramer, given where the Republican Party is now, is seen as like a normal Republican. And 5-6 years ago, he was seen as a far right guy. I mean, he's the guy that tweeted out about Nancy Pelosi. She's blank, the R word. She's that. I don't want to say it.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And Kevin Cramer was very evangelical and said some very controversial things during his campaign against Heidi Heitkamp, where, he said, well, pioneer women were tough and they didn't always complain about, harassment or sexual assault. And it was like, whoa. And I mean, it was just really out there. But again, showing where the Republican Party has gone, and you know this probably more than anybody because of what you do for a living, is he's like a statesman now. He's like an elder.
Yeah, well, what? Right.
This guy he's as nuts as any of them, but he's
well. I was just going to point out that's one of the things I think is especially concerning about Trump possibly winning again is that we kind of forget that there was. I mean, it's kind of sad to think about, but there was a faction, especially of Senate Republicans, who stifled him. We can all remember the John McCain, the infamous vote against ACA repeal. You had guys like Romney who weren't rubber stamps for him. Even guys like Flake down in Arizona, Ben Sass. I mean, there were a few who you wouldn't go as far as to say that they were like part of the resistance or anything, but all of those people have pretty much been purged. And so, yeah, I mean, you're left with people like Kevin Cramer who are the alleged kind of like moderates or like normal Republicans now. And so I think that's concerning in what it means for how easy it would be for Trump, especially if there's unified Republican control of Congress, how easy of a time he would have implementing all of his priorities in a way that, we do kind of forget. When you think on the first Trump term, it could have been a lot worse than it was. But for a handful of Republicans, including some in his administration, like John Kelly, his chief of staff, who, seemed like they were kind of working against him at points. And it seems like even Trump has kind of learned his lesson, in terms of appointing people in his administration, and would be more cognizant of appointing people who would be kind of rubber stamps for him or not push back. And I think you kind of see that in Congress too. So, I think among many things that's something I'm concerned about with the possibility of Trump returning to power.
As you've watched all these Trump videos and written about him and posted stuff on social media, have you noticed a change in Trump at all in the last 8 years since he kind of, rode down the golden escalator to announce he was running for president? Or is he kind of the same guy? Because again, I'm terrified of a second Trump administration for all the reasons just pointed out. And the odd thing is, which I tweeted out last night, was, we kind of wondered what it would be like the first time around with Trump. And we ended up, people like myself were horrified with the 4 years of Donald Trump. But he and his minions are pretty much saying right now, here's what we're going to do if we win back the White House. We're going to round up 11 million people. We're going to have red states able to track women's pregnancies. We're going to, jail our political opponents or assassinate them, because that's part of the duties of a president. And he wants to be immune from those types of things. It's nuts. But getting back to my question was, have you noticed a change in his speeches, in his tone, in his thing in the last 8 years?
Well, back in 2016, there was a lot of menace to Trumpism, so I don't think we want to downplay that. We can think about like the Muslim ban, a lot of the demagoguing about immigration. I think has been one thing that has been very consistent. That was kind of his core message back in 2016, and still, he talks about how he wants to be a dictator on day one to round people up basically and have a big mass deportation, and so that's been pretty consistent. But I will say that I think, especially after losing in 2020, it's become a lot more, I don't know if whiny is the right term, but like, the whole big lie thing and this notion that the election was stolen, and it's become such a big part of his political brand, and that obviously wasn't really there the first time around. And I think it is a little bit, I don't think that's really like winning him any new adherents or appealing to independent voters at all. I've noticed, I actually kind of highlighted this yesterday. I will get DMs from people pretty regularly who will kind of like try to do an armchair diagnosis that he has like dementia or something like that. And I always push back on that, because I think you could say the same thing about Joe Biden. Like you watch even a Biden speech from 2019 and then you watch him today, and like he's clearly slowed down. And, part of that is aging. These guys are both quite old. But then part of that, I think, is, being president is a very taxing job, and, it kind of wears you down. And I noticed that a lot. And I posted a video, which I actually retweeted just yesterday, because it came up in an interaction I was having, where if you watch a Trump clip from like 2015 or 2016 when he was campaigning, and then you watch a Trump clip, and the one that I posted in this tweet was from 2020, it's a night and day situation where he really slowed down quite a bit. You could tell his wit wasn't quite what it was. He just seemed a lot more tired and kind of worn out. And I think, if anything, being out of office has maybe slightly rejuvenated him, where his speeches these days seem a little bit more energetic. But, I think there was kind of and this is a weird thing to say, and, I don't know if like a comedic quality is quite the right way to put it, but, especially in 2015, 16, he had a certain charisma during his rallies that I think people found to be sort of attractive, and it led to people traveling to all of his different rallies. And, they were these big TV events in a way that I don't know if there's been an American politician in the TV era that's quite had that sort of charisma, where TV networks were showing his empty podium, and things like that before he would start speaking. And I feel like that has been degraded a little bit. And I think he's become more angry. And I think part of that these days, and we see this in the speeches, is all of the myriad of criminal problems that he faces, where, that's become a big part of his brand too, is, whining about weaponized justice and Biden allegedly colluding with these prosecutors to bring charges and election interference and all this stuff. And so, I think Trump these days has kind of an element of anger. And, the menace has been turned up even more so than it was. And I think there's an anger to it that wasn't quite as central to his political brand. And, I've been thinking about that quite a bit in the context of, I'm not sure these rallies really do him any good any longer, because, he's basically talking to his base voters who are going to vote for him no matter what. And what you really end up doing is creating all of these clips of him saying reprehensible stuff that people like me post, or, there's this account now, the Biden HQ Twitter account, which is like 24/7 rapid response to stuff that Trump says, either in interviews or on camera. And it just ends up creating kind of bad news cycles for him. And I don't think he's really appealing to new voters. My big concern more so than anything, and I think we're seeing this with these campus protests, is that the Democratic coalition ends up being fractured in such a way where, Biden ends up losing, not so much because Trump gains voters, but because Biden loses voters, or his coalition that he had in 2020 doesn't reassemble. And I'm actually more worried about that this week than I really have been, I think, at any time previously, because I just think that, we're seeing that there's a very loud, and I think social media can maybe cause people to overestimate how large it is, but it's very loud faction on the left that, at this point is openly, if flirting, if not declaring that they're not going to vote for Joe Biden over reasons that I think are, kind of silly, because, even if you, in good faith, your number one issue is Gaza and, liberating the Palestinian people, bringing Trump back is not going to help toward that goal. And, when you point that out, there's a lot of anger in the sense that you're kind of vote scolding, or like, the lesser of two evils isn't a good argument kind of thing. But I think Biden is making good faith efforts to accomplish a ceasefire. I do think he's been trying to moderate Benjamin Netanyahu. I also think he should have put more distance between himself and Netanyahu months ago. So I don't think he's played it perfectly. But, I just can't imagine burning down the Republic over a foreign conflict that's been going on for a century in one form or another. But it feels like, there's a lot of people who really want to do that. So I'm not that worried about Trump kind of expanding his base or winning, 51% of the vote. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we've seen that his ceiling is about 44, 45%, maybe 46%. I'm more worried that it ends up being the case where, it's an election where it's 44-43 with RFK Jr. getting 8% and Cornel West getting 4% or something like that. Similar to how 2016 played out.
Are you surprised that Trump is back this time around? Because, and this is, when he lost the election in 2020 and the January 6th stuff happened, and, Trump was going off his rocker, and there's clear evidence that there was people under his direction who were trying to, he's on recording on tape saying, "Find me the votes in Georgia." And I think many people, even Republicans who send me nasty emails, kept emailing me and saying, "Well, there you go. He's gone now. You don't have to worry about Trump. You can lose your Trump derangement syndrome." And I kept saying to them, I don't know that he's gone. I don't know that he's gone yet, because he has such a strong following and such a, just the base of his voters and the core of his voters are just with him through anything. I kept saying, I don't know that he's off the scene yet. I don't know that he's going away. Did you feel that way, or did you feel that he was going to also just kind of disappear after 2020 and the Republicans are going to move on?
I think I felt that way in terms of him possibly fading out for about like 2 weeks after January 6th. And then I think we all remember, when Kevin McCarthy made that fateful trip down to Mar-a-Lago in late January 2021, where he had the photo op with Trump. And then he released the statement, basically saying Trump is still the leader of the party. We talked about, our agenda going forward and working together. Shortly after that, Trump was impeached. And then, you had the Senate Republicans who kind of saved him by not convicting him, with Mitch McConnell doing that very craven thing where he, denounced Trump, but then voted to acquit him, which kind of set the stage for him to run again. And so, yeah, I think like a lot of people, I think back on the floor speeches, after the insurrection on January 6th. And, I think we all remember Lindsey Graham being kind of emotional and saying, basically like, it's been a good run, but it's over kind of thing. And, suggesting that he was done with Trump. But, I think what happened pretty quickly is that Republicans realized that their base still loved Trump, and that, if they were going to denounce Trump, they were probably going to end up losing their next primary election. And so, we saw people circle the wagons very quickly. And then that led to, basically a purging of anybody who voted for his impeachment, those House Republicans who did that or denounced him for January 6th. And so if you're still in the party in good standing, you basically had to make your peace with all of that stuff. And so, no, I wasn't really surprised. After the 2022 midterms were kind of a dud for Republicans, and Trump, of course, endorsed Dr. Oz and Herschel Walker, and there were all these bad candidates who ended up losing. And that was kind of the peak of the DeSantis hype, because of course DeSantis won by like 20 points down in Florida. And there was a moment there briefly that winter of 2022 into 2023 where I felt like DeSantis could give him a good run, because I felt like Trump's political fortunes were kind of at a low ebb and DeSantis was this rising star. But it just never really, I think it was mainly kind of a media hype thing. As soon as the campaign began and DeSantis declared his candidacy, he, like many of the other candidates in that race, was kind of pulling punches and not really willing to make the case. I think the case that would have had to have made would have been something along the lines of Trump is a loser who's lost like 3 or 4 elections in a row. I'm a winner. We should, nominate someone who can beat Joe Biden. But instead, they kind of, they tried to focus on Joe Biden and pretend that Trump didn't really exist. Meanwhile, all of the Republican base voters were still in love with him and going to his rallies and things like that. And so, by the time Nikki Haley was the last person standing and she tried to, make the case against Trump that he's unhinged and focused on the past and unfit to serve, but, it was too late by then. So no, I mean, there wasn't really any time where seriously in the last 4 years, I felt like he had lost his standing as the dominant force in the Republican Party. And I will go even a step further and say that I think there's a decent chance that even if he loses this year to Joe Biden, it would not shock me if he ends up being the nominee in 2028, because I just think, the Republican Party more and more resembles a cult of personality, and it's really hard to disabuse people of that. And so, it'll be fascinating to see what happens to the Republican Party if Trump loses. But it would not shock me at all if he ends up being the nominee again. I don't see who's, taking that mantle from him at this point.
What do you think of when you think of a Trump victory this November? Because I've gone from being terrified, and I still am, and I'm trying to talk tough, but I'm having this, I have a pit in the bottom of my stomach thinking about it and worrying about what could happen if he does win. But at the same time, part of me is sort of on the side of, you know what? We know exactly what he is. He said exactly what he's going to do. We know the minions who are underneath him are going to do all the horrible things that they say they're going to do, because they've been planning for this now for 4 years, whether it was Project 2025 or, rounding up 11 million immigrants and deporting them, all of those things. So we know exactly what he is. Where in 2016, maybe you thought, well, it's not going to be as bad as we think it is. And indeed, it was worse. But part of me, and maybe it's just me talking tough, is sort of like, if America decides to do this, and if he wins a fair election, then let the chips fall where they may. We are who we are. And if we're so stupid as a country to do that, then maybe that's what we deserve. Do you have any sense? How do you feel when you think about Trump winning?
I think I agree with everything that you said, in the sense of there's a pit in my stomach. It honestly makes me like, this is obviously, I'm from Minnesota. We're living here. We have no plans to go anywhere, but it does kind of bring up those thoughts of like, man, is there some other country we could go to? Or, especially having young kids, is like, is this really, where we want to raise our kids? Because you're right. I mean, people at this point, there's no mystery about who he is. There's no kind of plausible deniability, that it wouldn't be that bad. Because, I think you probably remember too, back in 2016, there was kind of this thought of, well, he's actually not that bad on LGBT issues, and he's a successful businessman, and wouldn't it be good to have someone like that in the White House who kind of brings like a fresh view? And that was pretty transparently BS all along. People should have known better, but especially now you should know better. And there's really, and I do think the media is doing a little bit better in terms of not normalizing him. And, and part of that, I think, is they get so much blowback whenever, they kind of push the false equivalency or try to sanitize Trump that, people get very mad at them in a way that I think, wasn't so much the case in 2016, when we didn't really know, that this kind of aspiring authoritarian running for the presidency was sort of a new thing in America. And so we've had to learn a lot, in the last 8 years about how to handle it. And I don't think the media does a perfect job, but I think they do better than they did in 2016. But that's kind of where that's where I come down as well. And I was feeling very, very optimistic about Biden's chances. And I still think, if I had to wager on it, I would say that, I still think Biden ultimately is the slight favorite in this election. I mean, I think the polling, It shows pretty much a dead heat right now, but we're looking at a situation where Trump is going to be on trial for at least it seems like the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I don't think this trial is helping him. I think it would hurt him even more if it was televised. But, he thinks that he's campaigning when he does these little rants outside the courthouse and, they're unhinged. They're very repetitive. I don't think they're really breaking through to people. And meanwhile, the economy is in pretty good shape. I think and this is the thing that makes me feel more crazy than anything is, by the standard of the classic Reagan question of, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I just don't think there's any doubt that we are. I mean, it's very easy to kind of forget, 4 years ago, we were all quarantining inside our homes as Trump tried to blame governors for the fact that there wasn't sufficient testing. And of course, there was no vaccine, which you can't blame Trump for. But as I've been doing these things on Twitter every day where I kind of re-up what was going on 4 years ago to the day, it's reminded me that, this was the time where Trump was doing those press briefings every day. And, it was all about kind of fighting with the media and blaming governors and threatening to withhold federal funding from blue states and, because they were being mean to him and things like that. And, it's just crazy to think that we're not better off now. And the economy is inflation obviously hurt a lot of people, but part of that was a cost of doing business just to get ourselves out of the pandemic. And the jobs market is historically strong and all these things. The fact that none of that seems to matter. I posted this yesterday on Twitter that I'm increasingly feeling like this election is kind of a referendum on whether anything matters anymore. Because to the extent that any of the traditional metrics of politics hold, Joe Biden should win this election. But, again, I've really seen it this week where there's a faction on the left that really wants to just kind of burn it down, heighten the contradictions. And it's hard. You can't really, how do you reason with these people? I mean, I found myself kind of in this box where when you try to reason with them or kind of point out why what they're saying is nuts, they get mad and accuse you of scolding them. And, and then you'll have other people kind of hopping in and telling you, you really need to try to persuade these people, not, scold them or kind of rebuke them. But you can't persuade them, they're beyond persuasion. So it's kind of like a lost cause. And so, I have been kind of wondering that in the sense of would I even keep covering politics if Trump wins again? And I really don't know. But it would kind of feel like, what are we even doing here? What's the point of even trying to get facts out to people or having, making what seems like a very basic case in my work for pro-democracy values and tolerance and, just kind of basic human egalitarian principles. But it increasingly, I increasingly wonder if people are just too far, in their silos or just not caring about politics to really be invested in these things. And so, it makes me overall feel pretty bad to think about Trump winning again. And it'll be something that I process over the next 6 months because one way or the other, it's going to be a nail biter. We're going to be sitting here on election night sweating, as the returns come in from Arizona. It's going to be, it's not going to be a comfortable win one way or the other. We know that. That's just how polarized our country is. And so we're going to have 6 months to kind of, come to terms with all the different potential outcomes of that.
Yeah, and I saw your tweet last night, and it's actually, I think it's pinned on your timeline if people want to check it out on Twitter. And that was a great way of putting it was, I mean, it's a referendum on whether anything matters because, and that's part of where my frustration comes that, whatever's going to happen is going to happen because I don't know that those of us who write about politics and those of us who talk about politics, you can only make the case for so long. I mean, it's just, and I live in Moorhead, Minnesota, but spend a lot of time in rural Minnesota. And I obviously borders North Dakota. And while Fargo is a pretty progressive city, the rest of North Dakota is as red as it could possibly be. And so maybe your optimism for Biden is a product of maybe where you live more than my pessimism. You know what I mean?
I live in Forest Lake. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, when I get out and about in rural Minnesota and rural North Dakota, it's like, wow. I mean, woo! It's a different world than the one maybe in which you live, or even living in Moorhead, which is a very progressive city, politically and otherwise. It just the conversations you overhear and the signs you see, and the people with the Let's Go Brandon flags flying at their farms and in their shops and their garages. We're in a different place, man, than this country's ever been. And that's what is just so frustrating for me is you talk about you can't talk sense to the people on the far left. You really can't talk sense to the people on the far right, or even in the Republican Party at all. I mean, again, there's this belief that there's this normal group of Republicans, and then but the louder group is the far right group, and I don't know where that line is anymore. And I've written about that multiple times. I need somebody to show me where that line is, because like I referenced earlier, if Kevin Cramer is middle of the road Republican now, then my God, what is, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know anything anymore. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And, I actually live in a pretty red area right now, Forest Lake, which is where I'm from. We'll talk off the podcast sometime, but we've been struggling to try and buy a place here for years and years. But so anyway, there's literally a Trump store, like a half mile up the street in a strip mall that's like a Trump merch store that was open during 2020 and then of course like closed, sometime after the election and now reopened. And so, I mean, that's the type of town that I live in, but I just kind of accept that. I mean, Forest Lake where I live is a 65% Republican area, and it has been, my whole life. And same thing with North Dakota, where like, yeah, I'm not surprised, when you see the signs in rural deep red parts of the country supporting Trump. But it's the 5% of people that are kind of the swing voters that could go either way. And I just think that, the threat that we face with Trump, the one to me, I mean, there's so many. And, I would encourage people, the tweet that you mentioned that's pinned, it's in response to this interview that Trump did with Time Magazine that I think was published Monday or Tuesday of this week, where, the interview was all about his policy agenda. And you alluded to this earlier, in our conversation about how he's talking about very openly, women being prosecuted if they have an abortion while they're pregnant and rounding people up. And like, he's not trying to hide it, at all. And I've been reading a lot, and this is, I should probably pick some like lighter reading to do, but there's a new history that came out quite recently on 1932 in Germany. The whole book is just about 1932, which was the year that like, it was very up and down for Hitler, where he went into the year thinking that he was on the cusp of becoming the chancellor because the Nazi Party was the largest party in the country. And then in the elections of that summer in July of 1932, the Nazis really had a bad election cycle where they ended up losing to the Social Democrats, and it seemed like Hitler was kind of on the wane. And then the book kind of charts his, it's more because of political intrigue than like popular demand, but the intriguing that led to him becoming chancellor in January of 1933. And, he accomplished that despite never winning a majority of the vote. I think at the most the Nazi Party got like, high 30s%. And of course it's a parliamentary system. So the vote is split a lot of different ways, in a way that the US doesn't really have that with our two-party system. But I really feel like in a lot of ways, this year in America reminds me of 1932, because part of what the book really discusses is kind of the contingencies of politics and how the fact that Hitler ended up becoming chancellor was kind of a very fluke outcome. Like it could have gone all these different ways, and he needed a lot of help from the center-right elites, a lot of kind of like the business community and these establishment politicians who enabled his rise because they viewed him as kind of crushing, he'd be useful in crushing the left and crushing the labor movement and the communist movement there. And, obviously there's a lot of parallels with what we're going through right now where, people like Kevin Cramer, who probably on some level knows better, right? There's certainly a lot of Republicans like J.D. Vance or Josh Hawley, where if they really stood for what they say that they stand for, they wouldn't support this guy. Or, you even look at these, I think the guy who's been doing the best interviews is George Stephanopoulos on ABC, where, he recently had Chris Sununu, who's the governor of New Hampshire, on his show. And basically, the question was, how can you support Trump? And he kind of presented statements that Sununu has made in the past about values that he has, and then juxtaposing that with stuff that Trump has said. And, even that question kind of reduced Sununu to, kind of word salad and incoherency. And so, that's kind of, we have a lot of people who should know better, who are kind of circling the wagons around Trump. And that's why I've always been skeptical when you see these polls where it's like, 20% of Republicans say they won't support Trump if he's convicted. I just don't buy it. I think ultimately they're going to circle the wagons around this guy. We've seen this time and time again. And so it's really, that's why I focus a little bit more on the left, because I kind of write off the Republicans at this point. They're going to vote for Trump. It is what it is. We need to reassemble on the left the coalition that we had in 2020 to beat him. And that's where my concern is. And so that's why I focus more, not only because I'm a progressive myself and it kind of makes more sense to engage with people who are sort of fellow travelers, at least, in theory with you, but also because I think the thing that is going to decide this election, whether or not Trump returns to power, is whether or not, Democrats can kind of keep it together and reassemble that coalition. And that's where I'm particularly worried, not so much about the fact that you see people in North Dakota or in Forest Lake, Minnesota, who have Trump flags up, because I just kind of take it for granted that that's how that's going to be.
Do you ever get exhausted from thinking about this and doing that? I mean, I just finished Rex Chapman's book about basketball, and I'm working on Joe Poznansky's book now about baseball, just to get away from some of this, and part because I still write some about sports as well. But do you ever wake up and go, what the hell am I doing? I mean, I'm just exhausted.
Increasingly. You're catching me at an interesting week for that, because, I was fighting with people on the internet all day yesterday. And so this morning was one of those mornings where it's like, why am I doing this? I do try and obviously decompress. Like you, I enjoy sports. So, I've been enjoying obviously the Timberwolves run in the playoffs. And, I'm actually looking forward, as I'm working this afternoon, I'm going to have the Twins game on because they play this afternoon in Chicago. So, yeah, I mean, I do. But, yeah, my reading tends to be kind of heavy just because I've always kind of enjoyed nonfiction and history, and especially at this particular moment, reading about kind of like Democratic backsliding seems apropos. So, but, I should say also at the same time, like, I do feel very grateful and fortunate that I'm able to cover, historic times for a living and kind of chronicle this stuff. So it never, thankfully I'm in a spot in life where there are other things I could do to make a living. So I don't feel kind of like, like I have no options, or I'm kind of like enslaved to doing this. But I do, as we talked about earlier, like I am very much kind of like wondering, if Trump wins, like, am I going to keep doing this or not? Because I want it to be impactful and feel meaningful, and, feel like there's a potential to kind of win hearts and minds, or to, just kind of shed light on things that are going on with an eye towards improving them. And I think it's going to be important, if Trump wins, for people to remind themselves that history does not end, and that, you're going to wake up the day after the election and we're all still going to be here. And, we're going to have to, really keep in mind kind of basic values of like trying to be kind to our neighbors and solidarity and things like that, because it's going to be a tough period. But history is not going to end. And, I think we all can think back on 2016. And I remember, like, I had a week after the election in 2016 where I was kind of in a fugue state, where I was kind of like, I couldn't believe that Trump won, and like, what does this mean? And oh my goodness. But we got through it, right? And so it'll be even scarier this time around. But, I don't plan, at least at this point in time, to leave the country. So, we're just going to have to make the best out of it, right? That's all you can do.
I joke with some of my fellow lefties that guys in our profession may not have a choice. We may be rounded up and thrown into a concentration camp in Pembina, North Dakota. So you might want to get out of covering politics, but there might also be a knock on your door, Aaron. So I just kind of keep that in mind as we're talking about our futures here.
It's possible, yeah. I mean, I would. My hunch would be that we would see more kind of lawfare, in the sense of, Trump has talked for years and years about trying to loosen defamation and libel laws, to make it easier to kind of sue outlets into oblivion. My hunch would be we see more of that. I mean, not that would be any fun, but he's talking in this interview. He talks about setting up detention camps, but he's talking about that specifically in the context of migrants. Not that makes it okay, but but for all the reasons that we talked about, I mean, if he wants to open up libel laws and make it easy to sue outlets out of existence, he's probably going to have a rubber stamp, in Congress for that, because if he wins, it's probably going to be a Republican wave election. And, so at that point, kind of all bets are off. And that's part of the lesson of 1932-33 Germany, is that when Hitler took power in 33, there was this coalition of center-right elites. He was the chancellor, but then this guy, Franz von Papen, was the vice chancellor. And von Papen was kind of this establishment, kind of center-right businessman who got into politics. And they all thought that his cabinet was going to be a check on Hitler. And they thought they had kind of actually marginalized him by making him chancellor, because now he's going to have to work with all of these other people. But then, of course, the Reichstag fire happened about a month later, and Hitler very quickly sidelined all of these other, the non-Nazis who were in his cabinet. And that, he basically consolidated control in like 2 or 3 months, where he became dictator. And so this stuff can happen. It happens slowly, and then it happens quickly. And, we're in kind of the slow part. And I think Biden could still, again, it's basically a coin flip. The way that I read kind of the polling and the state of things right now, But when you have a coin flip, a coin flip when the stakes are so high is pretty disconcerting, even if in other contexts, it might seem like decent odds. So it's just we have these 6 months. It's incumbent upon people to do the best they can to try to make it so that Donald Trump does not retake power. Because I think Biden has done a very good job. I'm not like I'm not like this huge Biden stan in the sense that I don't think anyone could have done the job as well as he did. But I think the most important thing is to prevent Trump from retaking power. And we have 6 months to try to work toward ensuring that doesn't happen.
Last question, and this was gonna be my first question, but I got so excited talking to you that I didn't open with this. But your Timberwolves, man, your Timberwolves are unbelievable. I'm one of these guys who my wife and I watch a lot of NBA basketball. She's a huge Celtics fan. We like NBA basketball. We watch a lot of Wolves games as well. We're both lifelong Minnesotans, but the Wolves all year were fantastic, but I had the same reservations that everybody else did. That it's like, but they seem to kind of not always meet the moment. And the Suns are a bad matchup, and Anthony Edwards is still immature. And where are they going to get out of Cat? And he whines at the refs too much. They blew the Suns out of the water, man. You got to be excited. Yeah. I mean, this is a team.
I was shocked. Yeah. Never in my wildest dreams. I kind of viewed it as, I actually, for all the reasons that people thought, I figured the Suns were likely to win. I didn't think it was like a slam dunk, but, I never in my wildest dreams did I think that the Wolves would sweep. And so that, I'm still kind of like in disbelief. Actually, shortly before we hopped on this call, the pre-sale tickets for the next round were on sale here. And I had so many friends who have season tickets blowing me up because they had like a pre-sale for season ticket holders that I had to I had to tell a lot of people no, because it's like I'm not going to buy like 100 tickets here. But yeah, people have Wolves fever here for sure. It's been 20 years since we've had a team like this, and I don't think it's absurd at this point to think that they can win the whole thing, especially if they can get through Denver, who seems like clearly the most formidable team in the West, at least, that's still standing. So they've been so inspiring and great that, the Twins are on a 9-game winning streak, and I've barely had time to care about it because it's like, yeah, I'm 100%, 100% pumped about the Wolves and really looking forward to game 1 on Saturday.
My wife and daughter went to the Timberwolves game in Boston back in January, the game where the Wolves pissed it down their leg in the last 4 minutes or so. My wife was thrilled, of course, because Jason Tatum hit a couple of huge threes and went off. But that would be a super, super fun NBA Finals, would be the Wolves against the Celtics. And really, if you live in Minnesota, even if you're a Celtics fan, you wouldn't really lose because if the Timberwolves happen to win a national or a NBA championship, what a great story. So it's a little diversion for us who have that at the bottom of our stomach, right? I mean, it's keeping us.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, no, and it's great because, especially with all of the ownership drama that they've had and kind of instability, in that respect, the best thing that they can do to kind of make sure that, there's a good future here in Minnesota for the team is to win, and to win at this level, sweeping a team that I think a lot of people viewed as, a contender to make a playoff run in the Suns with, at least two Hall of Fame players on their team. Very, very impressive. Didn't see it coming. Pleasantly surprised for once. And like I said, I think the series with Denver, I'm going to have a hard time. I'm probably just not going to make a pick because I don't want to pick Denver, but, I will be pleasantly surprised once again if the Wolves win. But then at that point, now that you've beaten Denver, I guess the only team looming after that would be Boston. And, you make it to the NBA Finals, no matter the outcome of that. That season's been a resounding success. And I think even already, even advancing around after 20 years, it's a good time to be a Timberwolves fan for sure.
I've kept you too long. Thank you, sir. Aaron Rupar. Yeah. And I'm pronouncing that correctly, right? I hope I didn't pronounce your name wrong, did I?
Perfect. You got it exactly right. Yep.
You can follow him on Twitter at @ATRupar, RUPAR. That's his handle. Great stuff. Aaron, thank you. Let's keep in touch, okay?
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thanks for listening, folks, to the McFeely Mess podcast at inforum.com. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess podcast at inforum.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inforum.com and search Mike McFeely.